Welcome everybody to Justin's Room, or Stories to Tell. Happens every third Wednesday of the month at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Info on future and past events, registration playlist, and donation opportunity is available at bit.ly/Justins-room, J&R capitalized. This is Alice. I do all of the opening slides with Sharon's help. Register at bit.ly/register Justin, R and J are capitalized. This is co-sponsored by the Disability History and Culture Collective, also known as DHACC, and the I Love You Lead On community. The slide has, as Susan was saying earlier, the line drawing that Teddy did of Justin with his signature hat, his glasses down on his nose, and his bolo tie. Based on the photo that Tom Olin took. There's also a QR code on the screen. Next slide. Justin's Room, our stories to tell, again, every third Wednesday of the month at 7 p.m. Justin Dart and his wife, Yoshiko, took road trips multiple times across the country, sitting with disabled people in every state to hear their challenges, successes, and hopes. They brought these powerful stories to Congress, helping to turn shared dreams into the Americans with Disabilities Act. Bring your words, your poems, your art, your dance, your music or video, whatever feels right for you. Scott, you are not limited to time, but for people that come on to share stories, about 8 minutes. If you covered up with some of my text, but I know it says something about wanting to register ahead of time and let us know that you're going to tell a story, or you can just come on to the Zoom. The microphone will be open for as long as folks have something to say, and we'll let you know when we turn off the recording. Every story is welcome. And if you have any questions, you can email us at leadon, capital L-O, at iloveyou-leadon.com, I-L-Y-L-O are capitalized. Information on future and past events, registration, playlist, and donation opportunity is available at bit.ly/Justins-room, J&R capitalized. Next slide. Tonight, we are having this wonderful presentation about stories about Ed Roberts and the interdependent movement. Our featured speaker is Scott Danforth. And again, there's information on the screen about future and past events, the registration, the playlist, and donation opportunity at bit.ly/Justins-room. You can register at bit.ly/register Justin. And I believe Ashton's putting those in the chat. Next slide. Coming up next month, we have stories about Stephen Taylor and disability studies. And our featured speaker is Rachel Zubel-Ruggieri. That will be on August 19th at 2026 at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 Eastern. Next slide. This event is not to be recorded. This live session is being recorded by DHACC and I Love You Lead On for registered participants and those in our community. It will be shared directly with you. Please do not record, copy, or share this event yourself. If you see this recording anywhere other than in official emails or on our website or on our own YouTube channel, it has been shared without our permission. Next slide. Contact us for help or accessibility requests. If you need help accessing the event or want to request a voice option during the presentation, email us at leadon@iloveyou-leadon.com. Next slide. Zoom etiquette and access. During the presentation, all Zoom attendees will be muted to support access and reduce background noise. If you need to use voice to communicate during the presentation, email us and we'll arrange a separate voice space just for that. You can put something in the chat as well. After the presentation ends, we'll open up the microphone for conversation, unrecorded, one voice at a time. Chat comments will be read aloud to provide access, and if you don't want the chat read aloud, you can use a private message. Next slide. Accessibility info. ASL is provided for the presentation and will be spotlighted. Auto captions are available and can be viewed on screen or as a transcript. In the Zoom toolbar, there is a CC option. If it is not there, Click the three dots for more options and locate it there. The ability to show and hide and adjust captions is there, as well as the option to have captions as a transcript. Next slide. A note about our ASL interpreter. In keeping with I Love You Lead On and DHACC's goal of making conversations about disability available and accessible to all, we invite our ASL interpreter to participate fully, asking questions and joining the discussion if and when they have them. Next slide. Justin Room sessions are recorded. All Justin's Room sessions are recorded and will be available on our playlist within a few days with corrected captions and transcripts. You can find the playlist on the Justin's Room website at bit.ly/Justin's-Room. Next slide. You can help make this space accessible. I Love You Lead On community and all of its various projects are volunteer-led. We have a variety of ways you can support our efforts to provide full access. Our work includes the Disability History and Culture Collective, DHACC, this space where we have Deva's Room, Judy's Room, Justin's Room, and other events on the horizon. You can donate at iloveyou-leadon.com, ILYL and O are capitalized, /donate. Next slide. You can join our email groups if you haven't already. Disability History and Culture Collective, DHACC, has 2 Google groups for disability-related conversations. DHACC Disability Museum, focused on museums and exhibits and collections, formal, informal, or in progress, and Disability Advocates Lead On for general disability community discussions, events, resources, and current issues. You may choose one or both depending on your interests. And for instructions and more information, you can go to https:// bit.ly/ DHACC-Google Groups. And both Google and Groups have capital G's. Next slide. If you have an idea in the future for Justin's Room, let us know your ideas. Email leadon@iloveyou-leadon.com. Next slide. And we didn't have a slide about our upcoming event on July 29th, which is a movie screening of Life After. And that's also on our website. We'll give you some more information in the chat about that. I'll get that out to Ashton. I think that's everything. I think we're ready for Susan. You want to kick us off?
I gotta go. Here we go. Okay, so tonight we've got Danforth, which is an excellent person to be storytelling, because he is a master storyteller. He wrote, I think, probably the definitive book on Ed Roberts, where he interviewed lots of people that knew Ed. And so when it comes to storytelling about Ed, I can't think of anybody better suited to do that. And there are a number of people who I spoke to, which I thought was going to be here, that said Scott was the one. He was definitely the one that needed to be here. And so I'm really glad you are. And one of the things maybe Scott will give us at the end, Scott is also a wonderful musician. And I absolutely adore his music. So maybe we can get a touch of that if he's so inspired.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here. I will immediately tell you that I think you must be thinking of a different musician, because I am a horrible musician, and you must be thinking of someone else.
Really?
Yes,
I
yes.
I thought I had some music by you.
No, you probably have some by Jeff Moyers. If you want a musician, Jeff was the male Joan Baez of the movement. He was the guy who sang the songs in the hallways at the the rally and the sit-in in 1977 in San Francisco. So there's our
Well,
great musician right
well,
there.
we have him amongst us, so
Yes, I know we're fortunate. Um, so I'll jump in. What I'll do is I wrote a book. It's called An Independent Man, Ed Roberts and the Fight for Disability Rights. It's the first biography of Ed Roberts. Um, it only took me 8 years of uh, research, library, archival research, interviewing people, all sorts of gathering of materials, and I wrote it. It came out in October. The University of California Press. There is. I'm really happy. When the book first came out, there was no audio book, and people, in the publishing world, audiobooks. Imagine this: accessibility is an afterthought. Audiobooks are not automatic, and so I actually had to arrange for it myself. My publisher did not do it, but I bumped into a wonderful radio announcer named Mitch Jeserich, and he's a disabled man in Berkeley, California, and he agreed to do the narration. So that's available on Audible and on Amazon.
Bravo.
So that I'm thrilled with. I'm just so to keep with the feel and the sensibility of this group, which I have not attended before. I'm not gonna read to you. I don't think that sort of suits the kind of sharing that you want. It'll be much too stiff, and there are multiple ways for you to read. But I think I'll tell some stories. I'll tell a couple, and then we'll see if people want to jump in and tell some of their own. I know Jeff for one has some stories. He told me stories. He may not remember, but he told me stories. But let me jump in with a couple of them to get us rolling. So the first I will tell you is sort of a story about stories, which is early in this research. I was trying to learn the names and the people to talk to. Who should I talk to? Um, and someone said, "Hey, talk to." There was a guy at the CIL, so the Center for Independent Living, the first independent living center, which was founded in the early 70s in Berkeley. And there was a guy there, in the mid 70s. His name was Ken Stein. And some of you maybe knew Ken. And so Ken knows a lot of people and he knows a lot of stories. So one of the first interviews I did was with Ken Stein, and he was sharing a lot of stories with me about the early days in Berkeley, the movement, and Ed Roberts. And at one point, he told me a story, and when he finished, I said, Ken, um, I think what you're describing actually happened, but Ed Roberts was not there. I absolutely know that. And Ken said, really? And I said, yeah, he wasn't there. And then Ken said, I think sometimes I tell stories and I assume that Ed was involved, even if he wasn't. And so it taught me early on that yes, that Ed was very, very important in the movement and in the very, very much in the foundation, but also there's a second layer of story that had occurred. And I heard a lot of them when I interviewed people. Ed became a folk hero. Ed became, what Babe Ruth is to baseball, what Michael Jordan is to basketball. He became what FDR is to liberal politics. He became the guy he became the hero of the movement early on. If you look, I'll give an example. If you look at the website of San Francisco State University, the Paul Longmore Center, which is they've got a great bunch of video interviews about the 504 sit-in 1977. And they're interviews with people who were there, and they're videos and audio. And there's a whole stack of them. And of course, I have watched all of them. And out of maybe, I don't know, maybe 20, 25 people, two of the people who were there inside for all those days said that Ed Roberts was the leader, not Judy Heumann.
Oh,
Two of the people. Now, Ed did visit. I'll give Ed
yeah,
his credit. He visited. He was in there more than once,
yeah.
but he did not stay overnight. In fact, he was not allowed to stay overnight. He was the head of the Department of Rehabilitation of the state of California. He wanted to actually be down there and be more involved, but his boss, Governor Jerry Brown, told him no. And so, in fact, he sent Joan Leon with a camera. He wanted to document it all for history. And the governor told him to cut that out. You can't spend state money on that. But two people got. So, what I learned over time is that Ed often, um, there was an assumption that Ed was involved even when he wasn't. And I don't say that in any way. I'm his biographer. I do not want to shortchange his activities and his importance. But he really also
Spirit was there.
yes, he became a folk hero, and and frankly, Ed loved it. If you know anything about Ed Roberts, is that he sought publicity. He loved publicity. He wanted a camera. He wanted a microphone. He wanted a stage. He sought those opportunities out. He was an entertainer. And so the fact that stories gathered about the movement early on, and they sort of put Ed as the icon. He was great with that. He was great, and I'm sure in some ways that was annoying to some others. If you look at the many other people who were involved, um, many people maybe weren't getting credit when Ed did. Um, and if you think about it, the politics of the time, much of this is beginning in 1969, going through much of the 70s, through the 80s. He was a white, educated man who used a wheelchair. And if you look at the movement was tended to be led by white, educated people in wheelchairs.
Yeah.
Not completely, but that tended to be the leaders. So there was a bias even in that um, framing of Ed as the man, as the guy. Okay, let me start with a story about Zona. If you're not familiar with Zona Roberts, she died about a year ago. Ed's mother lived to 105, if I have my math right. Um, I did get to interview Zona for the book, and she did many other interviews before that. So the one of the most important things about Zona, Zona's husband was a man named Vern, a railroad worker. Um, they were very mild-mannered people. Zona told me herself that she was someone who really couldn't handle conflict, had really did not know how to argue with people, did not know how to stand up to people. And yet she was the one who taught Ed how to fight. She was the one who, as she learned how to fight, became his role model. And the first fight was over his high school graduation. So picture Ed Roberts. He comes back. He spent about 18 months in two different hospitals in the San Francisco Bay Area. His family's home was in Burlingame, which is a suburb just south of San Francisco, right on the bay, a really delightful, sunny place. Um, his his father Vern, his mom Zona. He was the oldest of four boys. He had polio as a teenager, and when he finally got out of the hospital 18 months later, he really had made no progress in the rehabilitation. His body did not respond. He could wiggle a toe and move his hand a little bit. The movement of the hand was very important because later he was able to drive a power wheelchair because of it. But he came home and he slept in an iron lung in the living room of the family home. And he went to school, which was right across the street. Burlingame High School was right across the street, but he went to school initially through kind of a two-way audio uh, setup. And remember, this is late 1950s. This is very advanced technology for 1950s. That he would tap a little pedal with his toe, and that would allow him to speak. And they had speakers up on the walls of the classroom so that Ed could participate. And then at one point, his mother, so Zona, pushed him. She wanted him to go across the street and actually attend the high school, which Ed did not want to do. He did not want everyone staring at him. That's a whole other story, but I will basically skip through that and say he did attend. He went to Burlingame High School. And when the time came for graduation, Ed and his younger brother, Ron was 2 years younger, they were both going to graduate in the same class because Ed had been delayed through his illness. And so Zona went down to the high school and met with the counselor to really make sure that both of the boys had finished all their requirements and were ready for graduation. The counselor very matter-of-factly said, well, Ron is all set, but Ed has not fulfilled all of the graduation requirements. He has 2 left to do. And Zona was sort of baffled. What do you mean? He did everything. And she said, well, he's just going to have to come back for 1 more year of high school because he has 2 more classes left to take. And so Zona said, well, what did he miss? From everything I counted, he got them all. And the woman said, well, he did not take driver's education and he did not take physical education. And so at first, and Zona was very polite, very mild-mannered, small woman. She thought, what is this woman talking about? And so she said, well, I'm talking about Ed Roberts, my son, Ed Roberts. And she said, yes, I know. He has to fulfill these 2 requirements. He should come back next year. So Zona's just overwhelmed. She leaves the woman's office. She's wondering, how can Ed do physical education? How's he going to drive a car? What are they talking about? So she goes right away to the principal's office. And she figures maybe he'll get it. Maybe the principal will be more reasonable. And the principal basically kind of shuffled her off. He said, if my counselor, she's on top of this. If she says that Ed needs 2 more classes to graduate, he does. She's right. So it's not hard. Just send him back next year. He can come and finish it up next year. Oh, okay. So Zona goes home. She calls a friend of hers. It's terrible. Now that the book is sitting on my side, her friend's name is skipping out of my brain, but it's in the book. She calls a friend of hers who's on the school board and they kind of talk it all through. And her friend helps set her up with a meeting with the superintendent. And so the superintendent decides, instead of them having a meeting, he's going to send the assistant superintendent, the number 2 administrator in the district, to the Roberts home. The Zona is actually pretty pleased with that. She decides what we're going to do is we're going to have Ed be in the iron lung. And if you've ever seen an iron lung, it is like a Volkswagen in the house. It is a big metal tank that when the electric motor is pulsing, it sort of heaves. And it does the breathing. It forces the diaphragm in and back out again. And actually, Ed, he enjoyed it. He really liked his iron lung. A lot of people view them as sort of a casket on Earth, a living death, as something horrific. But Ed found it to be incredibly comfortable and warm.
Yeah.
So the man came by. And the administrator, and Zona was happy, and they were pleased because, how can you look at this teenager in the iron lung and say he's going to be in the PE class and climb the rope up to the ceiling of the gym, or how can he drive a car? I mean, it'll click. This man will understand. And he didn't. He didn't. Now, the thing about the iron lung is you have to picture the scene. It's a giant metal tube, and all you can see of Ed is his head. His head is poking out, kind of laying, uh, on a pillow, and his face looks up. And the man looked down at Ed's eyes, and he put his hand on the side of that iron lung, and he said to Ed, "Well, Ed, you wouldn't want a cheap diploma, would you?" And Zona got so mad. And remember, Zona was a small woman, and she essentially pushed that man out of the house. She said to him, "Why don't we? I guess we're just going to have to put a brick on the gas pedal so that the car will move." And she just tore into him and literally pushed him right out the front door. She was just enraged, just enraged. So then the next thing she arranged was she did arrange for a meeting with the superintendent. And the superintendent, now the rest of this is almost like being in a fun house, the old house of mirrors where you look at yourself and everything is twisted. Sona just kept thinking, how this is just too absurd. How could they not understand that he's not going to do those two classes? As a storyteller, I came to the conclusion that these people did understand. I think that they viewed Zona as an overzealous advocate, an overzealous mother, because in 1959, if you were paralyzed the way Ed was, you could graduate from high school, but you weren't going to be doing anything. I mean, I think the educators were convinced that he had no future, and she should just realize that. She should just admit that her son is not going to work. He's not going to college. He's not going to get married and have a family. He's not going to do typical things. What people with paralysis of the type that Ed had in 1959, they either were in hospitals. Years later, when Ed met John Hessler, who joined him in Cowell Hospital as the first two students with significant disabilities at Cal. John Hessler was a man who was paralyzed from an accident, and he had spent 5 years in a hospital, 5 years laying in bed. Very talented man who ended up with a master's degree and was an important person early in the movement. So, but I think that to the educators, Sona was being unreasonable. Who cares whether this guy graduates? He's going to be sitting at home. Let's not pretend. Let's not pretend. So Zona, she did the outrageous. She went and saw the superintendent, and the superintendent got it. He understood. He said, "I think you're right." He said, "Some people," the line was, "some people can't see past the nose on their face. Some people can't recognize what is going on." But he said, "I cannot give him the diploma with two missing requirements. You have to go to the school board and make a formal request that they allow him to graduate without these two requirements." So this meant Zona had to go and stand at the school board meeting where they have a microphone at the front, if you've ever been to a school board meeting, and you have to speak your piece and make a request, and it will be up to them. And her husband, Vern, was even more averse to conflict than she was. He was not going to be a help. He was not going to be able to stand up to an authority figure, and she was going to have to do it by herself. And she prepared herself. She got herself ready. She had notes written on a little piece of paper. She showed up for that meeting. She also she called each of Ed's teachers, and she arranged for all of his high school teachers to come to the meeting because she didn't want to be alone. She wanted, if this school board needed evidence, the other teachers could speak up, and they could speak up on Ed's behalf. She was ready for a fight. So she went into the meeting, and now on the way into the room, she's walking in, and standing at the front door as she walks in is the assistant superintendent who had come to her house, and she had pushed him out the door. That man is standing there, and he greets her with a big smile. "Hello, Mrs. Roberts. So glad you are here." And he was so happy and so jolly that Zona couldn't tell whether he was being authentic, meaning Ed's going to graduate, or was he twisting the knife, or was he sticking it to her? She honestly didn't know. So she went into the meeting just feeling doubly anxious because of that greeting. And she sat in the audience, and she had to wait through a boring school board meeting. If you've ever been to an event like that, it's pretty dry. Until finally they called, "Zona, it's your turn, Mrs. Roberts." And she stumbled down the aisle and went toward the microphone. But even before she could speak, the school board leader uh, made an announcement that we have already considered this case, and Ed Roberts has been an excellent student. Congratulations, Mrs. Roberts, your son will graduate. And she dropped her notes on the floor. She plopped down in her seat and cried. And she went home that night and she told Ed the story. And that was when Ed realized that if he was going to get somewhere in his life, meaning get out of the living room, go to college. He did start out by going to community college. That's where he got his first 2 years worth of credits. If he was going to get somewhere, they were going to have to fight. And that might be part of his life. And he realized his mother had just done it. So there's the story of the first fight in Ed's life, and the first time that Zona was his advocate and really his role model. And he really looked up to her and he loved her for it.
We have in the chat, Scott, a
Yes.
photo of Ed that Ashton put in there of Ed in the iron lung,
Yes, good. Thank you.
laying flat on some sort of surface I can see. Maybe there's a pillow under his head. And the rest, that's basically all you can see above the iron lung itself. So just to give everybody a context there of what Ed was dealing with when he was in the iron lung.
Thank you, Ashton. So I like to tell that story. Sometimes people say, "Oh, where did the movement start?" We like to pinpoint moments or specific actions or a certain person. We say, "Oh, the Revolutionary War started with Paul Revere and Concord," and we like to pinpoint, and that kind of thing is just impossible. It really is impossible. But I do like to think that this is where Ed began to learn about fighting, and he became a tremendous warrior who not only fought over and over and over again, but he took joy in it. He unlike Zona, who I think she learned to fight, but it still took everything out of her. Ed viewed it as a bit of a theater, and it was an enjoyable activity. And if you lost, damn, that stinks. That's terrible. You get up the next day, you come back, and there's going to be another one. There's going to be another one. And actually, one thing I'll reflect as I did a lot of podcasts when the book first came out. If you Google, you'll find a lot of podcasts where people are interviewing me, and the podcasters almost always ask, how does this relate to today? And it relates to today because we're seeing a lot of the gains unraveling. We're seeing an active attempt at the federal level to unravel the gains made by our greatest activists and that incredible generation of activists. And but they knew, and so if you go to Justin Dart, Judy Heumann, these are people that knew that they were going to have to fight every day. The fight, you don't just win and it's over. And I think that was one of the lessons is that you win and you celebrate. And Ed and the Berkeley gang sure know how to throw a party, but they were just on to the next thing because there's going to be another fight. So I want to I open things a little bit to others to participate and tell stories and talk. I don't want to hog the whole floor here. Um, you don't want to let me talk forever.
Can you tell a story relevant to him regretting calling it the independent living movement versus interdependent?
Yeah. Okay. So actually, that's the final that's the final chapter in the book. He he. So later on, in the 90s, he was involved in a camp. There was a camp that ran for a few summers, and it was called Camp Interdependence. And the Camp Interdependence, the theme of the entire, so the format of the camp, it was a camp for teenagers, and they used some state money initially, but later they got some foundation money. Ed was good at raising money. I can tell stories about that. Um, but um, they went out and went to high schools, and they recruited two different groups of students from high schools. One group was students who were very, very high profile, students who were the athletes, the top students, the people that everyone knew as the leaders. And then in the same high school, they would recruit a group of students who were students with disabilities. And they did this at multiple high schools. It's they get 10 of one group and 10 of the other, under the assumption that these were two different groups, which maybe sometimes they overlapped, but often they were two different groups. And they brought all these kids together in a summer camp. And all the activities that they did were to demonstrate interdependence. They used things like rope courses and all kinds of. They developed all these kind of cool activities where you had to help one another. The only way you could do it, you couldn't do anything alone. You had to be a part of the group helping one another. And then after the activities, they would sit down and in the old kind of 60s, 70s styles, they would have a rap session. They would talk through how it felt, what it was like. How was it for you to have others help you? What was it like for you to know you couldn't do this and you couldn't be safe without someone else? Um, and the camp was called Camp Interdependence. And really, and Ed would make big speeches at the camp every summer. But he really, the idea, I think, behind the independent living movement was to simply use a term that was politically useful. Um, People pretend, and we all know this, people pretend, and able-bodied people really pretend that they're independent, that they can be a self-made person, that they do it on their own. And we in America love that. Our politics are full of the idea that you can pull yourself up, you can do it yourself. And I think Ed understood not only could he not do it himself. um, Here, I'll give an example, back up a little bit, give an example. When Ed made a speech, and he made a lot of speeches, he spoke all over the world, but he would always start every speech by pointing to his personal attendant, the person who had traveled with him, and introducing him and saying, because of this person, I am able to be here with you today. Because this person uh, takes care of me in the way that they do. Now, he did that to give credit to someone he loved and to someone who was doing tremendous work for him. But he also did it as an introduction to the idea that we all rely on people all the time. We all count on other people. And so even when one individual gets credit, it's really not independence. But I think they used that word because the word was already in the environment. When the movement picked up the independent living idea in the early 70s, the field of rehabilitation had been writing about independent living for at least a decade. The rehabilitation profession, which was very powerful, the rehabilitation folks had a very different idea of independence. To the professionals, independence was more what you saw at the University of Illinois program than what you saw on the campus of UC Berkeley. At the University of Illinois ran a program for people with physical disabilities to get college degrees. And when those people came to campus, they were weeded out if they could not move themselves from their wheelchair into their bed, if they could not bathe themselves, if they could not feed themselves, if they could not put their clothes on. The idea of independence that lived in that program was that you had to do it for yourself. And so the new idea that developed at the Center for Independent Living, Berkeley, and was spread through all the independent living centers, oddly enough, under the title of independence, was let's see what you can do with the right kinds of assistance, with suitable assistance. Let's open up the possibilities for people to get employment, to be involved in recreation and education, etc. Let's not have them sitting on the sideline because they cannot scoop a bowl of Cheerios into their mouth. That's silliness. At one point here, I'll give an example. Ed actually went through extensive hospital training. They used to use these kind of Rube Goldberg devices with weights and pulleys, and Ed tried to learn how to feed himself, which he essentially couldn't do. But with a lot of training, he found he could eat his breakfast with this pulley device, which had weights that lifted his arm up and all this stuff. He could eat in about 3 hours. And so if you do the math, 3 meals a day, that's 9 hours a day, busting your tail just to put food in your mouth. What a waste for someone who should be out there making a difference in the world. So I think that the early independent living folks in Berkeley and elsewhere, they grabbed onto the term that the rehabilitation people used, and they knew they could try to fund it. And actually, that was one of Ed's great successes in California, was he was able to get funding for these independent living centers. But I think they knew all along that this version of independence wasn't the old one. It wasn't the do-it-yourself one. It was interdependence. It was counting on others for the kinds of support, which gave you opportunities to get out in the world, to live in the community.
Well stated.
If anybody wants to jump in with a story, either one from knowing Ed or something happened to you in your life that was inspired by Ed, either one.
Jeff. Yeah, I have a story that is not irreverent, but puts Ed in the context of Berkeley in the 70s. Him in his office at the Center for Independent Living I was deputy director of services when he was executive director. And he got word that he had been nominated to be the director of the State Department of Voc Rehab. So Joan Leon was in the office and myself, and Ed said, Joan, Jeff, come on, let's go over to my house. He lived within a couple blocks, easy walk and roll to his home. So he got his assistant, his aide, to get him situated in the iron lung. And then he said, John, I think his name was, hey, John, go get the hash. So he's in the iron lung, and John comes back with the hash and the hash pipe, and we all got high, and we're talking about the need to communicate now the 2,500 people that would be under Ed's direction about who he was, what he stood for, what the meaning of this monumental change was in Voc Rehab. And I began to talk aloud about what he might say. And and of course, I was steeped in the movement. I had gone to Berkeley and had tremendous assistance from the blind student study and the reader referrals that Ed had established through the disabled students program on campus. And so I knew of what I spoke, but Ed said to his secretary, hey, this is great, take this down. So I just spoke our truth. And Ed said, I need to write something for the Department of Rehab's newsletter to go out to my new people. And he said, let's use this. So quite by happenstance, I dictated Ed's first missive to the Department of Rehab. And Ed was so gentle and genuine that he knew that as far as I was concerned, I was speaking on behalf of the movement, and he took it as such and used my words. But I think you can, if you search online, you can find those remarks that Ed then used as his communication to the Department of Rehab staff. But Ed and I continued to grow in our careers, and I'd often see him at meetings where he'd be giving a keynote and I'd be performing a concert. And he was such a wonderful friend. Anyone that met Ed and spent any time with him, Susan and I were just talking about Justin Dart having the same impact on people. People just felt that he was their friend, and he was. But probably tens of thousands of people could reflect back and say, I was friends with Ed Roberts, and he may or may not have remembered who they were. But I did an oral history with Zona after Ed's passing. And I think that the fact that she was willing to move the family to Berkeley so that Ed would have easy access to his home and the iron lung, and the support of his brother, who acted as his aide, and his mother. It was really a family event. Without the support of Zona and Rob, Ed could not have done what he did. But Zona was willing to throw the whole family's force behind Ed's movement after junior college to Berkeley and then to Sacramento. Zona didn't move to Sacramento, but when Ed became director of rehab. But Zona was really as important a figure in the movement as was Ed, I think. I'm probably overstating that, but let's say she was enormously important. And I would welcome anyone challenging that.
Yep. Do you remember this, Scott? Scott speaking. Do you remember the content of that first public announcement that you and Ed worked up under the influence of certain chemicals? As his first statement. Do you remember what the content was?
Vaguely, I probably, if I was to freewheel it right now, I'd probably hit 70% of the high spots. But
So
you can find it online, I think.
Yeah, you told me about it, and then I dug it up too.
Oh,
One of the main points was the way that the rehab system, they used to call it creaming. The rehab system served sort of the clients who the system viewed as the easiest.
as easiest, yes.
Yeah. So people who quote unquote had severe disabilities or who were more difficult in their eyes to place in a job, they would avoid them.
Yeah, they called it creaming, or we
Yes.
called it creaming.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Ed made a dramatic statement at the very beginning of saying he was going to refocus the entire system towards the people who had been left on the sidelines, which was the people who were viewed as having significant or severe disabilities, which shocked the whole system. The people at the top, all the leaders thought he was crazy. It was just outrageous. But that's what he did was what you guys talked about.
I remember being at meetings of the Council of State Administrators of Oak Rehab, CSAVR, which Ed was a member of because of his position. And I remember we were talking about that, and I wouldn't say that Ed was shunned, but let's just say he wasn't welcomed into the old boys club with open arms. They thought it was pretty threatening, I think. Because of course, Ed had been told he wasn't vocationally viable. And they in turn told everyone else with severe disabilities, you're not going to be able to work, so why spend the money on you? But Ed proved them wrong, didn't he?
Yeah. And they had a system where they would keep statistics to show, and this was across the country, all the rehab systems at the state level would show their effectiveness by keeping statistics of which clients, how many clients they had, concluded the rehabilitation, which basically means they got you a job and you kept the job for 3 months.
You were 26.
Yeah, 26. They 26'd them. And it was all because of all the people they rejected, which, as you said, when Ed first applied to the rehabilitation system, when he was going to Cal, to the university, they rejected him and said he was infeasible. And what they meant was, we're not going to serve you because you're going nowhere.
Yeah. I think someone made the mistake of calling him a vegetable. And he would often open his talk saying, if I get to be a vegetable, I'll be a carrot, or something to that effect.
It was artichoke.
Artichoke, yeah.
So that story, I'll quickly jump in. That story goes back to when Ed was first ill, and when he was first had polio in the first week in the hospital, realized this is a teenage boy. He essentially lost, all use of his limbs, and then he got to the point he couldn't breathe, so they had to rush him into the iron lung. But there was a night where his temperature spiked, and everyone on the hospital ward and Ed's family, everyone knew if he's going to die, this is the night. This is the night he could die from this high fever. And what happened was he lived. And so in the morning, the doctor told Zona that he lived. And Zona basically said, "Thank God. Oh my God, I was so worried." And the doctor just laid into her. "How can you be thankful? He's going to be a vegetable."
Oh, yeah.
And Zona was shocked. She just wanted him to be alive. She wasn't thinking of where's he going to be and what's going to happen. This man was saying he's going to live as a vegetable. How can you be thankful? And Ed, as you said, he loved that story. What was it? He'd say, "I'm an artichoke. I'm crusty on the outside, a little prickly on the outside, but I'm soft in the middle."
We'll go ahead and get started again. We have a short video about our fundraising efforts that Ashton, who is helping with the tech support tonight, put together for Deva's room, but it also is very appropriate for Justin's as well. As we said earlier, we do need financial support, and we'll let this video speak for itself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to Deva's Room. Deva's Room is a virtual space open to all, seeking to bring anyone interested in disability studies together in conversation and in solidarity. Deva's Room is inspired by the life and legacy of Deva Kasnitz and her outstanding contributions to the field of disability studies. Deva's Room is volunteer-led by members of the Disability History and Culture Collective and the I Love You Lead On community. In a 2023 reflection, Deva wrote of her determination to be more comfortable in study and advocacy and to blend them together to create a diaspora of disability studies best ideas. By holding regular events led by prominent and emerging voices in disability studies, we hope to honor this mission. Deva believed in a fully inclusive world that respected everyone's communication strategies. Inclusive and accessible technology can be costly. You can help support technology expenses for Deva's Room, which will allow us to grow and expand. If you have the resources to contribute to the development and sustainability of Deva's Room, please consider donating by scanning the QR code on your screen or by visiting the link in the chat, donorbox.org/Deva-S-room. Thank you so much for showing up and learning together with us.
Again, help make this space accessible. I Love You Lead On community and all of its various projects are volunteer-led. We have a variety of ways you can support our efforts to provide full access. Our work includes the Disability History and Culture Collective, DHACC, this space, Deva's Room, Judy's Room, Justin's Room, and other events on the horizon. You can donate at iloveyou-leadon.com, ILYLO are capitalized, /donate. Next slide. For updated information, schedule and registration details, visit www.iloveyou-leadon.com /Justin or bit.ly/Justin's-room. Past episodes will soon be available at the playlist on YouTube, bit.ly/Justin's Room playlist, JRP are capitalized. Share your feedback about this event at https://bit.ly/all caps ILYLO all caps DHACC event feedback, capital E and F. And in the chat, we have information on the upcoming screening of Life After. We have a panel that will be happening after the film viewing. If you go to https://iloveyou-leadon.com /other-events/ and that will show you the information about the Zoom link for the intro to the movie itself, how to view the movie, and then tickets are available on a sliding scale to the actual panel discussion. And I think we're back to sharing some more stories.
Just as a reminder, this is a recorded event, so if anyone is not comfortable being recorded, just let us know so we can pause the video.
I can, how about a funny story? Want to hear a funny Ed Roberts story?
Yes.
All right. So I had mentioned, Jeff had mentioned the program on campus at UC Berkeley, the Disabled Students Program, DSP, which was really the precursor to the Center for Independent Living. The DSP, so you think 1970, a few universities did have programs supporting students with disabilities. They didn't have to by law. If you look at campuses now, they all have them, although most of them are not very good. But they're responding to laws, Section 504 and the ADA. But then they didn't have to. But the students, Ed and his friends, and John Hessler, who I mentioned earlier, John um, became the first director of the disabled student program. And the idea was that they wanted, and this is important too, because this carried through the movement, they wanted people with disabilities themselves providing the services to the students. The idea was that if you had a disability and you had that experience, you could be a better supporter, you could understand better, and you had greater access to the kind of knowledge that you needed to support someone else. So they came up with a program to support students on campus, and they got that rolling in 1970. So John Hessler is kind of someone we don't mention too often, but he was just a very intelligent, very brilliant man, a good leader. One thing I love in talking about John Hessler was he was very, very tall, somewhere between 6'5" and 6'7", and even sitting in a wheelchair, he looked very, very tall. And I can tell you the number. I mean, I can't count the number of people who told me that John was intimidating. And I just love the idea that this very, very tall man who was paralyzed would physically intimidate people because he would lean on them to get something done. Whereas Ed was more of the jolly and the enjoyable and the fun guy. Okay, the story. They used to like to the two of them served the university on a number of committees early on, helping the university as the university was building new buildings. They would consult with John and Ed about accessibility. And so the two of them knew upper administration people at the University of California. And so they were able to get basketball tickets. And they often liked to go to the basketball games, the men's basketball games. And they would sit in the front row. They would sit right up front. And so one time, this very large basketball player came flying into the crowd and landed right on top of Ed. And he just crushed down on Ed's foot. And so Ed was injured and in a lot of pain. So what did these two college students decide to do? They decided the way to deal with that kind of injury, that kind of pain, was to go drink beer. So, and realizing in the scope of Ed's life, Ed was not much of a drinker. I'm telling you about a beer drinking story on campus. But really, he was a guy who preferred to smoke cannabis. That was really his go-to. But that night, Ed was hurt. What's the best thing for an injury? Let's go drink beer. So they and their two attendants, because they had a couple of personal attendants, went to a campus bar, and they really got pretty drunk. And so at one point, Ed has to relieve himself. Now, I realize in the late 1960s, there isn't even an imagination for making restrooms accessible. There's hardly even a conversation about that. So really, there was no way Ed could get into the men's room and use the men's room. So he and his attendant, and John and his attendant, they went out into the alley behind the bar, and his attendant helped him to urinate into an empty beer pitcher. And while Ed is relieving himself into the beer pitcher, a police officer walks up, and the cop says, "I'm going to take you in for urinating in public." And so, of course, Ed is enjoying this. Ed says, "That's great. I hope that your jail cell must be equipped with an iron lung. It must have a Dinker respirator." And the cop's like, "What? What are you talking about?" And Ed's like, "Well, if you're going to keep me overnight, in your jail, you have to have an iron lung, or I'm not going to be able to here I'm saying breathe. I won't be able to breathe." And the man says, "Well, you're breathing right now, so don't think you're getting away with a fast one on me." Well, what Ed was doing was frog breathing. And if any of you know what that is, it's essentially swallowing air. If you go online, you could probably find a video of one of Ed's speeches, one of Ed's talks. And he often gave talks where he was, you'll see him frog breathing, and it looks like he has the hiccups. There's sort of a cadence to his talk. He'll talk a little bit and pause, and then his head kind of moves a little bit. You barely notice it unless you're looking for it. But he is swallowing air. And he could do that for a certain amount of time, a few hours. He could do it long enough to take a flight across the whole country. When he was a young man, he could do it. So basically, Ed explained to this cop that you're going to have a respirator because when I fall asleep, I stop frog breathing. So, and then it's going to be on you that this disabled guy died in your cell. So, but the end of the story is the cop essentially says, "Well, don't you do that again. Next time I'm going to put you in jail, young fella." And so Ed and John and their attendants just had a wonderful laugh all the way back to Cowell Hospital, which is the on-campus infirmary where they lived. Drunk as can be, laughing about how they put one over on the cop.
Good story.
Good trouble.
Good trouble.
Has anybody got any questions that they want to ask versus a hero story, or do you want to hear a story about something specific?
Yes, I have a question. This is Theo. I'm in Michigan. So, as a teacher and as Danforth as my teacher and mentor, I definitely have questions because, as I mentioned earlier, some of these historical books are very much helpful for teaching. I'm curious, Scott, in terms of the disability. I mean, I'm curious about the disability movement itself because for some reasons, Ed and his group transitioned from a local leader to an international leader. I'm curious, what were some of the triggers that led to that transition? That's one of the questions that I have. Of course, I also have a question in terms of, I'm also just curious about this story of swimming with the whales. And well, I don't know. I've read, there is a story you once published. Nowadays, it's not easily accessible online. I used to use it in my class. And then the same story appears in the book. And I'm curious, how did he manage with all that equipment?
Okay. A couple of great questions. Let me try the international one. I'll start with because Ed traveled the world. If you check, there was an independent living movement in Canada, Australia, Japan. They tried to get it going in Russia. I have a whole chapter on that. They definitely influenced the Russians, but there was no such thing as independent living movement in Russia. That didn't quite fly. But many countries had a similar sort of development to the United States. One of the avenues that moved Ed from a local leader and then sort of a national leader, one of the national leaders, to put it that way, was the development of Disabled Peoples International, DPI. And that group really was formed in 1980 in Winnipeg, Canada. And so Ed had been invited to Canadian leaders that I cannot overstate how important they are. We tend to think of the Canadians as following, but Jim Dirksen and Henry Enns, these are two disabled men who led the movement in Canada, and they brought Ed up and they gathered in 1980 in Winnipeg. Now, there was a meeting in Winnipeg that they attended. The meeting was a group called Rehabilitation International. This was the World Congress of the profession of rehabilitation, and realized that one of the obstacles for the movement was the power held by the rehabilitation profession. And so, for example, in the early 1980s, the United Nations turned to the rehabilitation profession for consultation on all disability issues. And so the United Nations, which many of us have looked to in recent decades as being a leader in framing disability rights as human rights around the world, and through the 1970s, they were not doing that. They were much more of a medical model, healthcare, diagnose and treat people. It wasn't about human rights. It wasn't about disability rights. So Henry Enns, Jim Dirksen, they bring Ed up to join them in Winnipeg, and the goal of this, they wanted to have disabled people take over Rehabilitation International. They thought they could take over the organization, and so they actually made a motion at the conference, and the motion was that at least half of the representatives on the leadership board on Rehabilitation International had to be disabled people, at least half. Of course, the board that voted on it was not disabled people, and they voted it down. So there were over 200 disabled leaders from around the world that were attending the meeting, and they were pissed off. They were very angry, and they all met together in a conference room in the hotel, the same hotel where the Rehabilitation International Congress was happening. And that's where Ed made a wonderful speech. And you have to remember, in 1980, Ed Roberts was the person that any activist around the world, any activist, even in the African countries, they knew of Ed Roberts. And so when he stood up, he rolled up, when he went to the microphone and he made his speech, and he the great quote is he said, "Cripples of the world unite," which was the great line. If you know that it's a line he's stealing from Karl Marx, and they loved it, and that was the beginning of DPI. Ed was one of the leaders in getting the group going, but it was the story of the Henry Enns, Jim Dirksen story from there, these two Canadian leaders who put together a worldwide conference of disability activists. Activists from around the world met 1 year later in Singapore. And they got the funding, they got the money, they made it happen, and they got this organization started. And the important thing about DPI was that it gave Ed and Henry Enns and others, it gave them access to the UN. The UN changed from really looking at the rehabilitation profession as their consultant, and they looked to the disability activists to tell them what was needed. And it completely changed the United Nations approach. So Ed was a pivotal figure in that. I'm trying to remember. I'm sorry, Theo. First of all, I love your shirt. I know that's not a Michigan shirt. Um, Theo's wearing a yellow shirt with flowers, and it looks like he stole it off of Don Ho. If you know who that is. It's a Hawaiian-looking shirt. It's wonderful. What was your second question, Theo?
It was about whales, swimming with the whales. I'm just curious about,
Yes.
just because, especially people, we still have that big issue up to now, participation in leisure and recreation. That's how I'm looking at it.
Right.
And
So I tell about it. There's a whole section in the book about Ed. There was a man named Roger Payne. You can look up Roger. You may think to yourself, have I ever heard whale songs? Have I ever heard a recording of whales singing? And most of us have, and it's because a scientist named Roger Payne recorded whales singing, and he became famous. And so when Ed and Roger Payne met, they formed this fascinating friendship. And Roger Payne was an oceanographer, a scientist, a conservationist, and he worked all over the world. And so Roger helped Ed to do two things. First of all, realize Ed loved to risk. Ed also went whitewater rafting. So there's a whole section in the book telling about Ed doing his whitewater rafting. But Roger Payne helped him to swim with dolphins in Florida and then swim with whales off the coast of Hawaii. And Roger and his team, they made this big foam and fiberglass chair that they could strap Ed into. It was essentially a floating chair and that they could strap him into. And then they took a swim mask, and they piped Ed's. By this point, late in his life, this is in the 1990s. Ed died in '95. The 1990s, Ed was breathing with a hose in his mouth, a little hose to his lip, and then he would take sort of hits of air off of it, and on the back of his chair there was a pump pumping the air. They took that whole device and they put that in like a floating, canister, and they ran the tube into his this mask, and they came up with a way for Ed to be in this floating chair. They tried it out. Now this is obviously incredibly risky. I mean, if he's just living from one breath to the next, provided by the mechanism. But they tried it out in Florida so that they could flip the chair over, roll it over, and he through these goggles could look at the dolphins down under the water. And his son Lee would go underneath the water and look at Ed's eyes. And they set up a communication system where Ed would have to blink a certain number of times if it was an emergency, because there was no other way to sound the alarm if he needed help. And that was the system they came up with, was this blinking of the eye system. So someone had to go under the water with them. But then when they went and they tried the same contraption in Hawaii. Now I'll tell you how did I learn about this? I interviewed Roger Payne. I interviewed another man who was on the boat with them, but also the Discovery Network, which is which was a cable television station. The Discovery Network was planning on doing a special on Ed Roberts and Roger Payne, the ocean scientist swimming with the whales in Hawaii. And so they sent out cameramen and videotaped kind of a practice run where and so I got a hold of the videotapes. The videotapes were real videotapes. They weren't even digital. And I got them digitized and I still have them. So I'm the only one in the world with these tapes. And it shows, Ed, it shows them putting him in the chair, in this foam chair and hoisting him. And they put him out on, what do you call that boat? A Zodiac? If you know what a Zodiac is, it's like a very fast motorboat that is inflatable. And they go zooming out into the ocean. I won't tell the whole story because there's some funny parts and it all falls apart. Ed is fine. He made it through, but it all fell apart, and he did not get to swim with the whales. And let's just say that there was an intervention with a large shark. I'll leave it at that. It turned into a very funny episode, and they all laughed their heads off about it all the way back to shore. But yeah, I mean, part of the reason that there's folk stories about Ed is that he did these things. I mean, he did outrageous stuff. And my interpretation, just as a guy trying to understand him, is that he realized early on that every day was risky for him. Every day was a risk. He could die any day, and he could be completely ignored by everyone every single day. And when you're in that situation, Ed decided, I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to go for it. He knew his situation was outrageous anyway. So if my life is already outrageous, let's go. Let's go. Put me in the boat and send me down the Whitewater River, and I'll whitewater raft. That's how he lived.
That was quite interesting. Yeah, so those are some of the teachable moments of the book. I'm curious, my final question, because I want others also to ask questions. And I guess this question, Jeff and others who are active during those era, you can also say more. So in the book, there is an element that I was curious about, just because for me, I look at disability rights movement in the US and around the world, including UK. I know there are people who are very much active about their disability rights in UK. And I can remember there's a book that was written in 1966 by, I think, Paul Hunt, something to do with stigma, something. And that one came immediately after 1963, after Goffman had written his book on stigma. But nonetheless, my question is, there element of, I'm curious about the solidarity of the disabled rights movement, the group including Ed Roberts, Judy Heumann, and others. I'm curious, what were some of the mechanisms that made them cohesive? In the context that I'm looking at that history while listening to the book, they did not have a lot of financial ability. They did not have, I think that is one of the way I'm looking at it. And they were going against the grain. This is some of the phrases that you've used in other books. I'm just paraphrasing that. And I'm curious because there is a time in that book where you mentioned that when Ed Roberts got I think I can't remember exactly the leadership he got. Female leaders felt that he ended up getting more money. I mean, I don't know whether that was like being bribed or like that. So I'm curious, what are some of the mechanisms that they never fell apart? Were there any other forces that were trying to divide and rule so that their goal is not achieved? And if so, what were some of the mechanisms that made them adhesive as a group?
Jeff, did you want to jump in from your experience?
No, why don't you speak first? I'm still trying to understand the question.
Okay. I think the first thing is to understand that there were ways that the movement and the original activists, there were ways that they could have been divided and that it could have fallen apart. You're right that the cohesion and the cooperation, the spirit, the teamwork, is what made it happen. But it could have fallen apart in a number of ways. Definitely, as you point out, sexism was a significant issue. There was a tendency. I think it reflected the Times and other organizations. The assumption was that men were leaders. Ed at his worst, he did accept more money than Joan Leon and Judy Heumann. When the three of them founded the World Institute on Disability, at one point he accepted a promotion above them. I spoke to Joan and to Judy about that and realized these are three people that founded an institute together to work on disability issues and research. And at one point, the board said we should just have one leader and let's have it be Ed. And they wanted to elevate him up and they wanted to give him more money than the other two. And he accepted it. And it wasn't his best day. But Judy, so to give an idea about how things hung together, I think what Judy and Joan Leon did was they realized we're gonna quietly and calmly take this insult and not make trouble of it because we want the movement to continue. We're going to take one for the team. That's what they did. And I think that was true when it came to gender, and I think that was true when it came to race. I think this was primarily a white movement. There's in the book I do tell about some work with the Black Panthers and some other efforts that went on, but there was people within the early Center for Independent Living who were African Americans who were not pleased with the racial politics of the group, who were not pleased that African Americans in, for instance, Berkeley and Oakland were not getting served very well. So the movement did have a lot of white male leadership, and that could be a reason why it fell apart, and yet it didn't. And my opinion is that many people realized they needed to embrace a flawed movement because it was so powerful, because it was an opportunity, because it was a way, despite the flaws, it was a way for people to come together. People with different kinds of disabilities too. That's a whole other thing. Realize that this starts with, in Berkeley at least, it starts with people who use wheelchairs, who have physical disabilities. There was outreach specifically to the deaf and the blind community. That's not a simple matter. I think Jeff could speak some to that. They were fairly successful in that kind of outreach and bringing those folks into the movement. It becomes a little more complicated when they bring in folks with intellectual disabilities. But there were people with intellectual disabilities who were involved in the sit-in, in the 504 sit-in, who were in the building. I mean, they really, and some of that really is some of the women, Kitty Cone, Judy Heumann, and some others who really made a tremendous effort to reach out, reach across boundaries, and try to make this a very, very diverse movement, racially, sexual orientation, gender, and types of disabilities. All of those are reasons why, all of those were dividing lines that could have made the whole thing fall apart. And yet it didn't. So I also will say that just if you look at the 504 sit-in in 1977, those interviews, the video interviews on the Paul Longmore Institute website, the people telling their stories about being in the building, and many of them saying that these, 25, 26 days were the greatest days of their life, that this was the peak, this was the best. They were together fighting the good fight, as uncomfortable as could be, with their friends. They loved these people. They had great parties every night. They had wonderful parties. And when it was over, it was a bit of a, I mean, they won. That's great. But it was also a letdown. It was over. It was just an incredible, so that kind of unity was powerful stuff. It was powerful stuff. So, Jeff, can you what are you thinking?
Yeah, I would say that, first of all, Ed was not universally popular. And there were people that were involved with the early days of establishing CIL that were jealous of Ed, I think, and resentful of his leadership. And I heard within the Berkeley community, the university community, there was a fellow who shared the blind student study. He had an office, as did I, and he said that, I mean, he actually slurred Ed, calling him Ed the Head, and was felt that he was a glory hound. That he and as you said, Ed did love the microphone, and but he was very good at it, and he was it would not have happened as it had without Ed, but he was not universally loved, and but the people that did join together, and initially it was people with physical disabilities and people who were blind, and that's pretty understandable in that there was no communication barrier. Everyone could speak and could hear, and the needs that the Center for Independent, first of all, the Physically Disabled Students Program, and then the Center for Independent Living, what they provided. And I went to work for CIL right out of Berkeley in '75. But we were providing services that were understandable and relatively easy to sell. And deafness came on while I was there, and we all had to learn sign language. I was managing the Deaf Services Program, and so the head of the Deaf Services Program, a woman named Joanne Hariki, taught a sign class. And I studied with her for a year and a half and became proficient, and as did many other people. But the expansion from that core physically disabled, and as you said, primarily folks who were post-polio and spinal cord quads, and then people with blindness. But it was a corpus that hung together because the core services that CIL were providing, which included things like transportation, and yes, accessible transportation, but also for blind people that didn't have the orientation to an area they wanted to go, or didn't have the cognitive ability to manage to learn routes. We provided transportation just in a car. Judy saw to the expansion into the deafness community and then eventually cognitive disabilities. But it was because the core services that we provided were easily altered. Like we had an attendant referral program, so it was easy enough to adapt that to include reader referral and interpreter referral. But I think had it not been for Ed's ability to understand how to tie into federal money, he went to Washington to study how the Black Panthers were doing it and how the Black community was drawing down federal money, and then using some of those same legal provisions, if I'm not mistaken, was able to draw down the first funding for the programs in Berkeley. Is that about right? Do you think?
I think you have great insight on all the development of the CIL and the way that they reached out to different communities, which I know was a challenge. And definitely Ed was not universally loved.
No.
Even in the independent living movement, there was a meeting, I got to get my dates right. There was a meeting in Boston of a group of independent leaders, I think 1974. And Ed's idea, he wanted all the independent living centers to take on the Berkeley model. He wanted them to imitate Berkeley and Berkeley to be the leader.
Yes.
To give you an example, I interviewed Lex Frieden. So if you think further, Lex Frieden was the right-hand man to Justin Dart. When they took that ball into the end zone in 1990, Lex was his right-hand guy. There were a couple of Texas guys, and Lex had started an independent living program in Houston in the 70s.
Yeah.
But the difference was that Ed wanted independent living centers to not only provide all the services, he wanted them to be political. He wanted them to be radical and to be leading the disability rights charge. And Lex Frieden, I mean, he told me when I interviewed, he said that was not happening in Houston. I mean, you have to realize the difference culturally between a place like Houston, Texas, and Berkeley. And one of Ed's sort of naive points was he kind of thought you could take radical Berkeley and spread it all around the world.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a strength and a weakness for him, I think. I think that was, but Lex basically said that wasn't flying in Texas. We were not, the hippie counterculture was not going to win the day in Texas. And in many parts of the country, it wasn't. So many of the independent living centers that formed immediately after the CIL were not very political. They provided good services. They did a lot of great things, but they were not political the way Ed wanted them to be.
Well, their money was coming from the Department of Rehabilitation.
Yes.
The funding went through the VR, and you couldn't bite the hand that was feeding you. So they were in a double bind. Yeah,
and although Ed had so Ed, by going to Sacramento, instead of biting the hand, he was trying to steal the hand.
Yeah.
He thought he could take over rehab, at least in California, which was the biggest system in the country.
Yeah, right.
And actually in the world, if you look at it that way. So Ed was not always, I think you're right in saying that everyone did not love him. Now, at the same time, he was a contradictory guy. I'll give another side. He was brash. He could be really full of himself. But one thing that happened a lot, he was often late for meetings. Now, some of that was he just lost track of time and he wasn't really good with that kind of detail. But also what would happen with Ed in Berkeley is he'd be just crossing the street and he'd see a disabled person that he didn't know.
Yes.
He'd just start talking to the person.
Yeah.
I mean, he was everyman.
And invite him home for dinner.
Yes. Before you know it, he's got that person coming to the CIL, receiving services, and coming over, and Zona's making him dinner.
Yeah.
And oops, I'm a half hour late for the meeting because I just met so and so. he did that thing over and over again. He was so much in touch with the everyday person.
The other person I wanted to mention that never gets mentioned is Mary Jane Owen, who was a blind woman who was on the CIL board, but she was a generation older than we were. Ed was born in 40. She was born in 30. And
Oh,
she had been part of the civil rights movement in the 40s, integrated a swimming pool in LA, was cut by flying glass when the fire department turned hoses on them and shattered plate glass windows. And she really put it in her put her body on the line. But she was able to bring to CIL that depth of knowledge so that when it came time for the 504 demonstration, she was distributing pamphlets to all the churches and all the community organizations. And she was the really the person that made 504 happen initially. And then she and Judy split the duties inside once the demonstration was rolling. And she was the morale leader. She was a great figure. Went on to Washington, D.C., but left Berkeley in the late 70s. But yeah, a woman that deserves a lot of credit that has not received it.
there's at one point, one of the people I interviewed had a line which was that it was the women who made the movement.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
I think the way that happened, in addition to, there were moments of great leadership. There were moments where women could come and be the leaders, and that happened. But also, the women were the ones who did the grunt work, the hard labor that had to happen, getting on the phone, typing letters, talking to people. It was often the women.
Yes, you're right. White women and generally in wheelchairs.
Yeah.
No.
Wow. Thank you very much for sharing. Wonderful stories indeed.
This is Alice. We're a little bit past the top of the hour. We would like to thank everybody for coming. We can stop the recording. Susan, do you have any closing? Sharon, do you have any closing? And then we can stop the recording, and if people want to stay on, we can continue to talk. And anyone have any thoughts about that? Susan, do you want to close the program? Please remember to go look at our events page and register for Life After. We'll be back the first week of the month with Judy's Room. I can't believe it's almost going to be August. And then Deva's Room and Justin's Room again in August as well. You can look at the website and find out when our next events are. If you haven't joined the Google group, please do. Please let us know if you have joined the Google group and you have any access needs. Please reach out to us and let us know. We want to make things as accessible to everyone as possible.
I want to thank you guys for being here. Your stories are wonderful, Scott. It's so great to not just read, but hear your voice. Combination makes me go to get that Audible book. And I hope all of you think about checking out Life After. It'll be 2 weeks from tonight. Life After is a film that was created about the movement around assisted suicide and what happens to people who change their mind. And what we're doing is we're showing the film first, and that will be on a screening called Kinema. So you can watch the film from anywhere you want, and you see it from a screening link. And then afterwards, we'll all move to Zoom, where we'll have a discussion about the film. So you can watch the film with us or not. join the discussion with us or not. Hopefully it'll be a nice evening, and starts at 5:45 with some orientation and gathering beforehand, and we'll end up around 9 o'clock. And it's free, but donations are very welcome.
Well, we'll go ahead and stop our recordings, and we'll have this up on the website soon.